So Exodus 19. On the third new moon, after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain. While Moses went up to God, the Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel." So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." And Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and may also believe you forever." When Moses told the words of the people to the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments. And be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. And you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or to touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot. Whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain." So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people, and they washed their garments. And he said to the people, "Be ready, for the third day do not go near a woman." On the morning of the third day there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud on the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in the thunder. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down and warn the people, lest they break through to the Lord to look, and many of them perish. And also let the priests who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them." And Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you yourselves warned us, saying, set limits around the mountain and consecrate it." And the Lord said to him, "Go down and come up, bringing Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them." So Moses went down to the people and told them. Well, as we come to this section, it begins a new section in the book of Exodus, but it also acts as a transition point between what has come before and what will come after. Because if you remember the book of Exodus, if you remember some of the outline of it, what happens before the plagues is that Moses meets with God in the burning bush. And God tells him that he is going on this mission to bring Israel out that they might worship him on that very same mountain. So this happened to Moses back on Mount Sinai in chapter 3. And now we're coming full circle that the people have left Israel and now have come to stand before the presence of the Lord. And you'll also remember that the book of Exodus is very concerned with the theme of who is Yahweh, who is the Lord. And that it has been going through all of these different smaller episodes in order to show God's people and the surrounding nations who this God is. We see him in all of his power unfurled against Pharaoh during the plagues. But then we see his ability to rescue and redeem, and then we see his ability to provide for his people. And now we'll see him in some sense in all of his glory and his power and his might, so that this generation of Israel would almost come full circle, seeing his power, seeing his provision, and now in a sense seeing him, even though he's clouded and shrouded before them. Yet nonetheless, in some way, he is there in their midst. And so you have really this amazing passage, and this is what precedes the giving of the Ten Commandments. And so this section before us, as I said, closes one section and opens another one. But it also has inside of it some of the most important verses in the book of Exodus, which itself is full of incredibly important verses. All of God's word is important, but you have these great sections on the disclosure of God's name in chapter 3. And then you have here God speaking to Israel about who they are in relationship to him. And obviously in chapter 20, you have the very Ten Commandments. So as we look at this section, just see it in three parts. The first one we see in verses 1 through 6 is Israel's calling, who they are in relationship to God. In verses 7 through 15, we have Israel's consecration. They are being prepared to meet with God. And in verses 16 through 25, we have Israel's confrontation. They are now being brought into the presence of the Lord, the calling, the consecration, and confrontation. And so we begin with Israel's calling. This new section begins. Normally, you can see the way Hebrew transitions by using the word and such and such, and such and such. This continuing section, verse 19, has a dramatic stop on the third day. It's really highlighting that something new has taken place here. And we see that geographically, that Israel has left one wilderness, and now they have come to Sinai. And Sinai is this important place. And so Israel has been moving through the wilderness in order to reach this destination. And so they come to Sinai. They come to the mountain. And they come to where God has said he will bring his people out of the land that they might worship him and be in his presence. And then the Lord calls Moses, and Moses comes, and the Lord then discloses to him what he is to say to the people. And what he'll speak about, we've broken up into two sections. He'll speak first about Israel's deliverance and how he has delivered them, but now what Israel is to become, or what their calling is to be. And these are the verses here in verses 4, 5, and 6 that become hugely important in understanding God's people in relationship to God. And they are even more impressive when you think about the context. The first is Israel's inability to save themselves. And the second is, now that Israel is saved, they've spent the last 3 chapters grumbling, complaining, and rebelling against God as he's continued to provide for them. And again, that context is important, because what you assume God will say is, you have been a disobedient and rebellious people, and I will have nothing more to do with you. But actually what he says, I have redeemed you for a purpose. And again, I think that's fascinating, that what we think should happen is the exact opposite of what does happen, because as we hear later in Exodus 36, who God is, he's long suffering. He's steadfast. And so he begins by speaking of Israel's deliverance in 3 different ways. In verse 4, he says, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians. Second, how I bore you on eagle's wings. And third, how I've brought you to myself. He's recounting this past deliverance because they're entering into this covenant, or to this promise with Israel. The Lord's entering it. And so he's recounting the past deeds that have taken place to remind Israel really of God's power, but also of his care. Simply put, he reminds them of his great power displayed in pulling them out of Egypt. It wasn't simply that they escaped under the cover of night in some kind of clandestine maneuver, but rather God in all of his power unfurled his might against the Egyptian gods and found them wanting. And then he brings them through the Red Sea in order to show them this final and permanent deliverance, that not only has Egypt been destroyed, their gods shown up to be nothing, but the entire Egyptian army is gone. There's just corpses floating in the water to show Israel now that there's nothing for them to worry about. They have been completely and absolutely delivered from the power of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will never harm them again. And then he says, I have borne you on eagle's wings. He has been one who, like a mother hen, has sought to care for and provide for his people. He has been physically present with them in the pillar of cloud and fire. And he has borne his people up. He has provided for them at every turn. Anything that they lacked, he provided for them. And so he has been with them and providing for them. And then for this purpose, I have brought you to myself. God has saved them not just because they were being oppressed, but because they were his, for the purpose of bringing them to himself. And it starts to see as we go into the next section, this rich and great privilege that Israel has. That they were saved not because of who they were, but of who God is and the promises he has made, so that they may be brought to dwell and be in the presence of God. So verse 5 then turns, now therefore, because of what I've done and have been doing, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice, keep my covenant, then you shall be. And he'll go into three different things of who Israel is in relation to him and in relation to the rest of the earth. And here we have this condition to what God has said. So he has saved them unconditionally. He has brought them to be his people. And now he tells them they are to actually obey him now. And this idea of unconditional and conditional is found in all of these big episodes where God is with his people. When he calls Abraham out, Abraham still has to obey. And actually, Abraham still has to then circumcise his children, even though God has unconditionally called him and has then provided for him and promised to bless him. Abraham is still to respond in faith and obedience. And the same thing happens here. God has called these people out unconditionally. He has brought them to himself, but he is still demanding that they are to be obedient to him. And as we see, there's a point to that obedience. But nonetheless, just like Adam in the garden, who has been provided for, who is called to obedience, so Israel is called to obedience. And we see that even in the new covenant. Jesus, who comes to save unconditionally, right? He saves his people not because of any worth in them. He saves them because of his love for them. But he nonetheless, once saved, calls them to obedience. We have the Sermon on the Mount showing how the people of God are to live in the kingdom of God. That they are called to obedience. And so what God is saying here is not at odds with what he said in the past or what he will say in the future. But simply put, he saved his people unconditionally, but now calls them to live in light of who he is. And so he says three things about Israel. You shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. That second part there, he just reminds Israel, I could have chosen any nation. I own all of this. That he glances down on the earth in this such a small globe before him, like we would look at a normal globe sitting in our room. God looks down upon it and says, I own all of this. This is all mine. But I have decided to choose you, Israel, out of all of this to be my treasured possession. This word is really used of kings and of their treasury and of their wealth and the things that are most precious to them. And so again, look at what God is saying. You are my treasured possession. You are that which I have sought, I have claimed, I have brought because of my love that I have placed upon you. You are my treasured possession out of all the peoples of all the earth. Think of this great privilege that Israel has. And he says, because of that, you then shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And so when God here speaks of a kingdom of priests, we have to almost start to fast forward to when the priests are instituted in the life of Israel. For the priests were to act in many ways like Moses. The priests would have on them things that symbolized to the people God. So they were to represent God to the people of Israel. Right? They were the ones that were allowed into the Holy of Holies, into the presence of God, who would then come back out of it. And so they represented God to the people. But they also, if you may remember, they had their breastplate that they wore that had the stone signifying the 12 tribes of Israel. And so they also represented the people to God, for they were the ones that would make atonement. They would operate the whole temple tabernacle complex for the purpose of representing the people to God. And so what is God saying here? He is not saying that the entirety of Israel is to be Levitical priests and operating the temple sacrifices and things like that. He's not saying that. He is saying that you are to operate as priests in a broader sense, that this nation that I have called out is to be a representative of me to the people, the other nations, and also to represent the nations to me. They are to act as intermediaries. And Peter himself picks up on this very theme by saying, you as believers, as Christians, are now a kingdom of priests. And you think through, what does that mean, that we are kingdom of priests? Obviously, it doesn't mean we run the sacrificial system, but it does mean that we intercede and interact between these two groups. Those who are outside of God and God himself. Isn't it what Jesus says in the Great Commission? Go forth to the ends of the earth, preaching and teaching. Basically, he is commissioning and sending out his people to do what? To be priests throughout the world. And he also says you are to be a holy nation. And it's here with the use of the word nation that's interesting. Normally, when God refers to Israel, he refers to them as his people, not as a nation. And here the use of nation is often used, in a sense, to speak of the other nations in distinction from Israel. So I think it's deliberate here that the Lord is not saying you are to be a holy people, but a holy nation, because there's a sense where Israel is one of many. Israel is a nation amongst a series of nations. But Israel is to have something distinctive about them. They are to be holy. The word holy just means set apart, distinctive. And God will explain to them what holiness actually entails through some of the rest of Exodus. But nonetheless, he's already planting that seed is you are to live differently than the surrounding nations. You are to believe differently. You are to act differently. You are to live differently as a kingdom of priests representing me to the nations and representing the nations to me. And these are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. So Moses goes, he does this, he speaks to the elders. The elders speak to the people respond that we will do all that the Lord has spoken. Though at this sense, it's almost comical or ironic in the midst of what Israel has previously done. They also have no idea what God is going to ask them to do just yet. But already we see here God's gracious electing purpose. He called Israel not because they were good. He called Israel because he loved them. If you're here today and you're in Jesus Christ, God didn't call you because you were good. He called you because he loved you. He loved you first, called you, and through that is at work making you into a holy person, a holy nation, a kingdom of priests. That we are to be obedient to what he says in order that we might then represent God to the people. I mean, if you think about this, that we, in general, if I were to ask you the question, who are you? We generally define ourselves by relationship. I was thinking through this morning. We can almost think of all of the definitions of who we would respond with as a relationship, a husband, a father. Even what I do for work is a relationship between my employer and myself. Even my hobbies are me in a relationship to something else. I'm an amateur cook. Right? It's all based on relationships. How do you define yourself? Well, here, God is saying his people are defined by this. They are his treasured possession, his representatives to the nations, and they are to be a holy people. This is who they are, their definition, their constitution of who they are. And I find that fascinating because these are the very last people who should be getting this privilege. And if you're here today in the Lord Jesus Christ, if you search your heart, heck, just look back the last 2 days, 3 days, weeks, You search your heart and see, I'm the last person God should have chosen to bestow his grace upon me. I'm even now saying that or preaching this morning, I think I am a sinner. What right do I have here to be saying any of this to any of you this morning? But the reality is that if I trust in Jesus Christ, it's not about what I have done, it's about what he has done and is doing. And so we have this mighty deliverance, this mighty grumbling that the people have done, yet God speaking to his people of who they are because of him. The next section, we have Israel's consecration. You can imagine with verses 7 through 15, you can imagine a stately visit. There's a difference in how you will respond if I show up at your house versus how the King of England, if he shows up at your house. Or rather, when dignitaries show up for state functions, there's usually a lot of pomp and circumstance that goes into when important people visit. Versus if I try to visit, usually the gates just stay locked. And here Israel is not just receiving another state dignitary, they're receiving the King of the universe. God himself is going to come into their midst. So how should they respond? And you see Moses is given instructions. Moses is given instructions on how the people are to act. And there's two ways in which the people are to respond. The first is they are to cleanse themselves, to consecrate themselves. And then they're also to then be aware of or recognize the external consecration of the mountain. So Israel is to be holy, set apart, consecrated. And they're also to remember and be reminded that the mountain itself that they're coming to is consecrated and is holy and is set apart. And so these words are delivered, that they are to wash their garments. They are to, in a sense, almost like baptism, they are to be seen as externally cleansed. And they are to come and to gather before the Lord. They are to be cleansed and ready. They are to take 2 days in order to complete this process, to recognize that what is about to come is something that is mighty, that is important, that is this huge and rich ceremony. And so they are to take it seriously. And then the second is to be reminded that this mountain of which God will dwell, the very act of him coming down in all his glory and presence, means this mountain, at least for this time, will be something special. And that Israel is not to go near it. They are not to touch it, because whoever does will be put to death, whether that's by God himself or by some of the Israelites gathered there. Later we see the Levites taking up this themselves. But any animal or human that touches the mountain is immediately to be put to death, whether stoned or shot, meaning here with like a bow and arrow. And they will not live, for this mountain has been consecrated and set apart. And so Moses comes down and tells the people to do this, to be ready for the third day. And he appends this small thing here for the men not to go near women, just simply to say that they're not to have sexual intercourse during this time, because they are really to be set apart and ready for this presence of God to come near. And then finally, we see as Israel goes through this process, the Lord is instructing them or teaching them. He is showing them, even though they are consecrating themselves, they're still sinful. That as part of the need here, that these are a sinful people coming into the presence of God. And even the barrier that divides the mountain from the people is a further reminder and a vivid picture of God's transcendent holiness in the midst of these people. So it's a picture of grace, but it's also a reminder that sin still separates. We see this, a spiritual separation, but also a geographical one. Moses comes from the people and he ascends while God descends. And finally, we have Israel's confrontation in 16 through 25. Moses brings the people to meet God. Verse 17, Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. I mean, to me, when I'm taking in my notes, the thing that stands out to me, what I highlighted quite quickly, was meet God. And it's just fascinating that through all of this, that all that has happened, now comes the moment that Israel will stand in the presence of God himself. I was talking to the children that this end of this long journey, it is not quite the same as arriving at your destination, ready for your holiday. Rather, the people come to the mountain, and what do they see? Well, they actually see this almost overwhelming kind of sensory overload. Right? There's black smoke billowing out like a kiln that is roaring fire underneath, just burning and eating everything inside it and billowing out this black cloud. And then there's trumpet blasts that are gathering and growing and getting closer. There's thunder, there's lightning. Oftentimes when you see God or glimpses of him in the Old Testament, it is through this massive and powerful storm. Because you think about the transcendent God who created the universe, how is he going to appear before his people in order to show them who he is and all his power and his might? And if you've ever seen a massive thunderstorm like this, you start to think that's a pretty good way to convey who God is in all of his power and his might. And so Mount Sinai is wrapped in smoke, and there's fire and there's lightning blasts, thunder and lightning in this thick cloud. And Moses recounts the sound of the trumpet is growing louder and louder. And the trumpet is often used either to call people to worship or to war. And so you have this loud sound growing amongst the people. And it says that the people in the camp trembled. And of course they would. But I like also what it tells us, is that as this smoke billows around the mountain and God descends on top of it, the mountain itself trembles at the presence of the Lord. And so then Moses then speaks to the Lord, and God answers him in the thunder. So God speaks audibly to Moses in order to confirm to the people that he is indeed their mediator. I think what's happening here is God is not just confirming who Moses was in the past, but he's setting him up for what the future holds as he leads the people who will increasingly become more difficult. They need to know that their mediator is commissioned and sent by God himself, that God in the midst of all of this speaks out to Moses directly. And it is Moses he summons up the mountain. So Moses goes up the mountain, and the Lord reiterates or reminds him to go warn the people again, lest they break through and lest they perish. And Moses reminds, I just find this kind of humorous. Moses says, we've already done that. And God tells him, go down the mountain, do this, and make sure, bring Aaron up with you. Because if the people break out, the Lord will break out against them. And this happens actually in the case of Uzziah later on when they're transporting the ark. You may remember the story. It's on a rickety cart. The ark of the covenant falls off, and Uzziah steps in to catch it, and the Lord kills him. Because that ark was not to be handled and not to be profaned in that type of way. And just the same way, this mountain now has become this symbol of God and his presence and is not to be profaned. So Moses goes down to the people and reminds them again of the seriousness of the situation. So it's a powerful picture of God's presence amongst his people, but it's also a gracious picture because the Lord has saved them and now continues to show them his power and his might. In many ways, this should put the fear of God into Israel as they see his awe and his might, but it should also encourage Israel as they go forward because who is on their side? I mean, think about all the might that Pharaoh had was nothing in comparison to what Israel has just now seen. This should encourage Israel to say, if this is with us, we will be victorious. We will be victorious. But yet Israel often forgets. But yet we have this terrifying scene here. And I think what we see, especially in Exodus 19, is this swinging pendulum. And we've really seen this throughout Exodus. That on the one hand, we want to see God is gracious. He is kind. He is compassionate. He is steadfast. But that pendulum also swings to say he is holy. He is powerful. He is mighty. And we keep seeing that throughout here, that the Lord is gracious. He has called Israel, but he's also mighty, and he's powerful, and he's holy, and he's set apart. And both can coexist together. God is holy, but he's also gracious, which is, again, fascinating that those two things can go together so easily. And I think what absolutely is the most fascinating is when you come to Jesus himself. Because this is Jesus. He is this cosmic king. He was there before creation, and as God the Father speaks, he is the word that brings forth creation. He's infinitely powerful and mighty, and yet he comes as a baby in a feeding trough. And he comes now so that all of this priestly apparatus that is set up after this is gone. There's no more priests, there's no more sacrifices. And there's actually even greater access that the people of God have now in Jesus. And really, as we come to a close and eventually come to the Lord's Supper to think of God's presence with us, it's just instructive to see what the writer of Hebrews, who is dealing with this problem of there are Jews now who want to go back to Judaism. And he constantly wants to remind them that what they have in Jesus Christ is now better. This is the better Moses. This is one who is greater than the angels. This is the one who has all power and might. This is Jesus himself. And he says this in chapter 12 of Hebrews. He says, for you, speaking of New Testament believers, you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further message be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the innumerable angels in festal gathering. You do not come to this earthly mountain. You come to the heavenly throne room. And to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, the angels gathered around, and the saints who have gone before us, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See that you do not refuse him who is speaking. And now he's warning us. If this is the message the Israelites heard in the Old Testament, the message you hear now from Jesus. For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns from heaven. And at the same time, his voice shook the earth. But now he promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. Verse 28, therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Brothers and sisters, that's who we come to. Again, the same pendulum. God who is a consuming fire, but God who is gracious in the Lord Jesus Christ, who is both of these things. And we come into his presence to worship him this morning. Let us pray.